Do you have a husband? Kristen James froze with her notary seal clutched in both hands. She'd been inside the Arezzo building for barely 20 minutes, standing in an office that felt more like a throne room, trying not to stare at the dark-haired man behind the massive desk, or the tattoos snaking up his forearms. And then Frank, the sharply dressed man who'd escorted her upstairs, leaned against the doorframe and dropped that question like he was asking about the weather. Kristen let out a polite, nervous laugh. Not yet. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. Now that you're settled in and ready to relax, don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow brings another soothing tale. But for now, let's drift into the story quietly. The moment those two words left her mouth, everything in the room shifted, because Enzo Arezzo, the man who'd been reading through paperwork in deadly silence, slammed his hand down on the desk, hard enough to crack the wood. The sound made Kristen's heart stop. He didn't move from his chair. His shoulders went rigid, his jaw locked tight, his eyes dark and burning, snapped to her face like she'd just confessed to a crime she didn't know she'd committed. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Kristen felt those seconds in every nerve of her body. Frank smiled, amused. Easy, boss. Just making conversation. Enzo didn't even glance at Frank. His attention stayed locked on Kristen, and that stare alone made her forget how to breathe. She had no idea why he looked furious, or hurt, or both. Miss James. Enzo's voice came out low and rough, like gravel scraping across broken glass. Sit, now. Frank raised his eyebrows, clearly enjoying himself. Oh, someone's very jealous. Kristen almost dropped her notary kit. No, stop, he's not. Her cheeks burned. It's just a question. I'm here for a property transfer. Enzo didn't wait for her to finish. He stood, and the sheer presence of him standing made the room feel smaller. He walked around the desk, each step deliberate, and stopped close enough that she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, leather and smoke. Frank muttered something under his breath and stepped out, still grinning. The door clicked shut. Kristen shifted her weight, unsure where to look, her hands gripping the notary seal like it could protect her. Did I say something wrong? Wrong, Enzo repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut. He studied her face, her hands, then his gaze dropped to her left hand. Show me your ring. She blinked, confused. My engagement ring? Now. She extended her hand slowly, the diamond catching the dim office light. It was beautiful. Paul had told her it was his grandmother's, a family heirloom. She'd cried when he proposed. Enzo stared at it for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, almost possessive, his thumb brushing over the ring. When he looked up, his expression had shifted into something colder, something lethal. You're wearing a dead woman's jewelry, he said quietly. Kristen's stomach dropped. What? Enzo released her hand and walked back to his desk. But instead of sitting, he opened a drawer and pulled out a file. He threw it onto the desk between them. That ring belonged to my mother. It was stolen 15 years ago. The night she was murdered. The room tilted. Kristen's pulse roared in her ears. That's impossible. Paul said. Paul lied. Enzo's voice was quiet now, but it carried a weight that made her knees weak. About everything. He opened the file slowly, deliberately, and turned it toward her. Inside were photographs. 3 women. All of them beautiful. All of them looked eerily like her, and beneath each photo was a death certificate. Paul's previous wives, Enzo said, watching her carefully. All of them married him. All of them trusted him. And all of them are dead. Kristen's hands started trembling. She couldn't look away from the photos. Their faces, their smiles. They looked so happy. 3 months ago, she'd been happy too. She'd been sitting in a coffee shop near her office, exhausted from a double shift of notarizing documents for estate sales, when Paul walked in. He was charming, warm. He bought her coffee without asking, said he noticed she looked like she needed a break. They talked for hours. He told her he was a real estate developer, showed her photos of properties he claimed to be renovating. He listened when she told him about her sister, about the medical bills piling up, about how she was drowning trying to keep her sister in a decent care facility. He didn't run. He stayed. And 2 weeks later, he proposed with that ring. She thought it was fate. She thought someone finally saw her, finally cared. She thought she was building a life, but she was wrong. Enzo leaned forward, bracing his hands on the desk, pulling her back to the present. You said not yet. That means you're still alive, still breathing, still his His jaw clenched. But in 3 days, you won't be. Why? Her voice cracked. Why would he? Money, life insurance, debt. Enzo's gaze softened, just slightly, but the anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. He's been planning your funeral since the day he met you. Kristen shook her head, denial crashing through her chest. No, we bought a house together. We're getting married. He loves me. Enzo's laugh was bitter. He doesn't love you. He's already spent your money. The house? It's a trap. The prenup you signed? It gives him the legal right to kill you. The words hit her like a fist. She stumbled back a step, her vision blurring. Enzo moved fast, faster than she expected, catching her arm before she fell. His grip was steady, grounding. Breathe, he ordered softly. Just breathe. She looked up at him, this dangerous man who just shattered her entire world. Why do you care? His expression darkened. Because I've been watching you. I saw you visiting your sister at the care facility. I saw you brushing her hair even when she didn't recognize you. His voice dropped, and I saw him draining you dry while you tried to save her. Kristen's chest tightened. How do you know about my sister? Enzo's thumb brushed across her wrist, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle it made her ache. I know the facility administrators. I know Paul hasn't paid a single dime in 6 months. The money you gave him? He pocketed it. The betrayal hit her all over again, sharper this time. Every dollar she'd given Paul, every extra shift she worked, every time she skipped meals to save money, he'd taken it all. And her sister, the only family she had left, had been surviving because a stranger, a man she'd never met until today, had been covering the debt. You have 2 choices, Enzo said, his voice steady and certain. Walk out of this building and die in 3 days, or stay with me, and we destroy the man who thought your life was disposable. Kristen stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. She came here to notarize a deed, to finalize the life she thought she was building, but that life had never existed. She looked down at the ring on her finger, the stolen ring, the ring stained with someone else's blood. Slowly, she pulled it off. The metal felt cold. Heavy. Wrong. She set it on the desk between them. And when she looked back at Enzo, something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Rage. Tell me what I need to do. Enzo didn't answer right away. He picked up the ring she'd just removed, holding it up to the light like it was evidence at a crime scene. And maybe it was. Look at it, he said, his voice softer now but no less commanding. Really look at it. Kristen stepped closer, her pulse still racing, and focused on the ring. The setting was intricate, almost antique, delicate filigree work wrapped around the center stone, and along the band were tiny engravings she'd never noticed before. She'd been too swept up in the proposal, too emotional to examine it closely. Enzo reached into the file on his desk and pulled out a photograph, yellowed at the edges, protected in a plastic sleeve. He placed it beside the ring. The photo showed a woman's hand, elegant and graceful, wearing the exact same ring, the same unique setting, the same engravings. Kristen's breath caught. That's my mother, Enzo said quietly. Taken 2 hours before she was killed. He paused, his jaw working like he was swallowing something bitter. The man who murdered her stole 3 things that night: her ring, her necklace, and her life. His eyes lifted to meet Kristen's. Your fiancé didn't inherit this from his grandmother. He took it off a dead woman's hand. Kristen's stomach twisted violently. She wanted to argue, wanted to find some explanation that made sense. But the evidence was right there, identical, undeniable. Still, her mind grasped for anything to hold on to. Maybe Paul didn't know. Maybe he bought it from someone. Maybe he... Stop. Enzo's voice cut through her denial like a blade. He moved around the desk again, closing the distance between them. Don't defend him. Don't make excuses for a man who's been lying to you since the moment you met. He loves me, Kristen said, but even as the words left her mouth, they sounded hollow. We're buying a cottage together. He showed me the plans. He's a developer. He's building us a life. He's building your coffin. Enzo's hand shot out and grabbed the dossier, flipping it open with barely controlled fury. Photos spilled across the desk. 3 women, 3 beautiful faces frozen in time. Wedding photos, honeymoon snapshots, and then the others, the ones that made Kristen's knees buckle. Crime scene photographs, accident reports, Death certificates? Enzo's finger stabbed at each photo in turn. Sarah Mitchell. Married Paul 3 years ago. Dead 2 weeks later. Fell from a balcony in Santorini. He moved to the next. Rachel Torres. Married him 18 months after that. Drowned in a bathtub on her honeymoon in Bali. His voice was getting rougher, angrier. Jessica Langford. 6 months ago. Car accident. Brake failure. Kristen couldn't breathe. Each woman looked like her. Same hair color, same build, same soft features. It was like staring into a gallery of ghosts, all wearing her face. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be real. It's real." Enzo stepped closer. So close she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "And you're next. You were always next." She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why? Why would he do this? Money, insurance payouts, debt he racks up in their names and walks away from when they're gone. Enzo's hand reached out, and before she could process what he was doing, his fingers brushed against her cheek, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "He saw you. He studied you. He knew exactly what to say to make you trust him." His thumb traced along her jawline, the touch surprisingly gentle despite the rage burning in his eyes. "He touched you. It wasn't a question." His voice dropped lower, darker. "He put his hands on you and promised you a future while digging your grave." The way he said it, the possessive edge to his words, the barely leashed violence simmering beneath his control, it sent a shiver down Kristen's spine that had nothing to do with fear. This was jealousy, raw and primal. He wasn't just angry that Paul was a killer. He was furious that Paul had touched her, had held her, had made her believe in something that was never real. "Yes," Kristen whispered, her voice breaking. "He touched me. He held me. He made me feel like I mattered." The tears finally spilled over, hot and humiliating. "How could I have been so stupid?" "You weren't stupid." Enzo's other hand came up to frame her face, his palms warm against her skin. "You were kind. You were trusting." He weaponized that. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and for a moment, they stood there in the dim office, breathing the same air. "But he doesn't get to touch you anymore. Do you understand me?" Kristen's hands came up instinctively, gripping the front of his shirt. The fabric was expensive, soft under her trembling fingers. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, so different from her own erratic pulse. "I don't understand any of this. I don't understand why you care. I don't understand why you're helping me." Enzo pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Because when I saw you at that care facility, sitting beside your sister, reading to her even though she couldn't hear you, I saw something I thought was extinct. Loyalty, devotion, love that doesn't ask for anything in return." His thumb wiped away a tear from her cheek, and then I saw him circling you like a vulture. And I couldn't let it happen. Not again. Again? Before Enzo could answer, the office door burst open. Frank strode in, his expression unreadable. "Boss, we've got a situation. Paul's been calling Miss James's phone. 5 times in the last 10 minutes. Kristen's blood ran cold. She'd left her phone in her car. She hadn't thought about it. Hadn't thought about anything except the nightmare unfolding in this office. Enzo's entire demeanor shifted. He stepped away from Kristen, his hands falling to his sides, and when he turned to face Frank, his expression was lethal. "And you're telling me this now?" Frank held up his hands. "I was giving you space to what?" Enzo's voice was quiet, but the danger in it made the air feel thinner. To let her fiancé get suspicious? To give him time to run? Frank's smile faltered. "I was trying to help, boss. You seemed pretty focused on convincing her." Something passed between the two men, something Kristen couldn't quite read. But Enzo's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke again, his tone had turned to ice. "How does Paul have her number, Frank?" Frank blinked. "What?" "Her personal cell, the one she doesn't give to clients, the one she only gives to people she trusts." Enzo took a step toward Frank. "How does Paul know to call that number?" Kristen's mind was spinning, trying to keep up. Frank's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to make Enzo's hand shoot out and grab Frank by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "You set her up." Enzo's voice was a growl. "You told him about the meeting. You told him she'd be here." Frank laughed, but it sounded forced. "Boss, you're paranoid. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to protect this family." Enzo leaned in, his face inches from Frank's. "Not to sell out innocent women to a serial killer. He released Frank with a shove. Get out. And if I find out you've contacted Paul, if I find out you've warned him in any way, they'll never find your body. Frank straightened his suit, his mask slipping back into place. He shot Kristen a look that sent chills down her spine, something cold and calculating. Then he turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Kristen's legs finally gave out, and she sank into the chair behind her. He's working with Paul. He was. Enzo walked to a cabinet in the corner and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to Kristen. Now he's a dead man walking. Kristen stared at the glass in her hand, the liquid inside catching the dim light. She didn't drink. She set it down on the desk, her fingers still trembling. What happens now? Before Enzo could answer, the office door opened again. Frank stepped back inside, and this time his expression was different. Harder. The pleasant mask he'd worn earlier was gone. Boss, I think we should let Miss James go home. This has been traumatic enough. Paul is waiting for her, and if she doesn't show up soon, he's going to get suspicious. The words hung in the air like smoke. Enzo went completely still. Kristen watched his shoulders tense, watched the muscle in his jaw tick. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. Say that again. Frank's eyes flickered. I said Paul is waiting. How do you know his name? Enzo turned slowly, and the movement was predatory. Miss James never mentioned her fiancé's name. I never said it. So how do you know it's Paul? Kristen's heart stopped. Frank laughed, but it sounded wrong. Forced. Boss, you're being paranoid. She probably mentioned it when I brought her up. She didn't. Enzo took a step forward. I was listening to every word. She never said his name. Another step. But you did. Just now. And 15 minutes ago, when you took a call in the hallway. Enzo's hand shot out and grabbed Frank's phone from his jacket pocket before Frank could react. He unlocked it with a swipe, his face darkening as he scrolled through the messages. When he looked up, his expression was murderous. You've been texting him updates. Every move she makes, every word she says. Frank's hand moved toward his waistband, but Enzo was faster. His hand shot out, locking around Frank's throat and slamming him backward against the wall. The impact shook the room. Frank clawed at Enzo's hand, gagging, his feet scrabbling for purchase, but Enzo held him there with terrifying ease. The husband question. Enzo snarled, tightening his grip until Frank's face turned red. That was the signal. You were checking if the trap was set. Frank couldn't speak. He could only wheeze, his eyes bulging with panic. Enzo leaned in, his voice a low, lethal rumble. You're fired, Frank. You're out of the family. And the only reason I'm not killing you right now is because I don't want her to see it. Enzo released him with a violent shove. Frank collapsed to his hands and knees, gasping for air, coughing violently. Get out, Enzo commanded. If I see you near her again, or if you warn Paul, you're a dead man. Frank scrambled to his feet, straightening his suit with trembling hands. He shot Kristen one last look, fear, mixed with something calculating before stumbling out the door. Enzo watched him go, his chest heaving, then turned to Kristen, his expression softening slightly when he saw her face. We're leaving. Now, where are we going? Kristen's voice sounded small, distant. Somewhere safe. Enzo grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and crossed to her. He took her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that she knew he wasn't asking. He guided her out of the office, past Frank's unconscious form, and down a hallway she hadn't seen before. They stopped at a private elevator, one that required a keycard. Enzo swiped his card and pulled her inside. The doors closed, sealing them in. The elevator was small, intimate, all dark wood and brass fixtures. The hum of the machinery was the only sound besides their breathing. Kristen pressed her back against the wall, trying to create space, but there was nowhere to go. Enzo turned to face her, and suddenly the elevator felt even smaller. He braced one hand against the wall beside her head, leaning in, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, smell the leather of his jacket mixed with something darker, smoke and danger and expensive cologne. You need to understand something, Enzo said, his voice low and rough. The moment you walked into my building, you became mine to protect. That's not negotiable. His eyes searched hers, looking for something. Walk out those doors when we reach the bottom, and you die in 3 days. Stay with me, and you live. Choose. Kristen's heart hammered against her ribs. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could see the barely controlled violence simmering beneath his surface. He was giving her a choice, but they both knew there was only one answer. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You don't know me. I know enough." His free hand came up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was gentle, at odds with everything else about him. "I know you visit your sister every Sunday. I know you read to her even though the doctors say she can't hear you. I know you work double shifts to pay bills that were never your responsibility." His thumb traced along her cheekbone. "I know you're loyal to people who don't deserve it. And I know that 3 days from now, if I let you walk away, I'll be putting flowers on your grave next to the others." Kristen's breath caught, the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and breakable, like he'd burn the world down to keep her safe. It terrified her. It made something inside her chest crack open. "I don't understand this. Any of this." Her hands came up, pressing against his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. "Yesterday, I was planning a wedding. I was happy. And now you're telling me everything was a lie, and I'm supposed to just trust you instead?" "No." Enzo's voice dropped even lower. "You're not supposed to trust me. You're supposed to survive. Trust comes later." The elevator slowed, then stopped. The doors didn't open yet. They stood there in the suspended moment, his body caging hers against the wall, her hands still pressed against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, so different from her own frantic pulse. "But I need to know you're choosing this, choosing to fight back, because once we step out of this elevator, there's no going back. Paul will know. Frank will tell him before Marco disposes of him. And then it's war." Kristen looked up at him. This dangerous man who'd shattered her world and was offering to put it back together in a shape she didn't recognize. "The prenup," she said suddenly, grasping at something solid, something logical. "We signed a prenup to protect my assets. Paul insisted on it. He said he didn't want anyone thinking he was marrying me for money." Enzo's expression changed. A dark, bitter smile curved his lips. "A prenup?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Kristen, that wasn't a prenup." The elevator doors opened, revealing an underground parking garage, dimly lit and empty except for a black car waiting nearby. Enzo took her hand, pulling her out into the cold space. That was a death warrant. The car was waiting, engine running, a sleek black limousine that looked like it cost more than Kristen's entire annual salary. Enzo opened the door and guided her inside, his hand on the small of her back, protective and possessive. The interior was all dark leather and tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that promised privacy and danger in equal measure. Kristen slid across the seat, her hands shaking as she tried to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Enzo climbed in beside her and tapped the partition. The car pulled away smoothly, and within seconds they were out of the parking garage and onto the street. Rain had started to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the roof and windows. The sound should have been soothing. Instead, it felt ominous, like the sky itself was mourning what she was about to learn. Enzo reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a tablet. He powered it on, the cold blue light illuminating his face in the darkness. "You said you signed a prenup," he said, not looking at her yet. "Do you have a copy?" Kristen's purse was still somehow in her hands. She'd been clutching it this whole time without realizing. She opened it with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded document. Paul had given it to her 2 weeks ago, told her it was standard procedure, that it would protect both of them. She'd signed it without reading it carefully, trusting him completely, trusting a monster. She handed it to Enzo, and he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced efficiency. His expression grew darker with every line. "This isn't a prenuptial agreement," Enzo said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. "It's a power of attorney, buried in legal jargon so you wouldn't notice." He pointed to a section near the bottom. "This clause gives Paul full medical decision-making authority in the event you're incapacitated, including the right to refuse life-sustaining treatment." Kristen's blood turned to ice. "What does that mean?" "It means," Enzo said, his jaw clenched, "that if something happens to you on your honeymoon, if you end up in a hospital, unconscious, Paul can legally pull the plug. No questions asked. No family consultation required. And he walks away with your life insurance payout, your assets, and clean hands." The words hit her like physical blows. She'd signed her own death warrant, put her signature on the document that would let Paul kill her legally. "Oh my God." Her voice came out as a whisper. "Oh my God. I signed it. I didn't even read it properly. I just trusted." "Stop." Enzo's hand covered hers, warm and solid. "This isn't your fault. This is what he does. He's a professional. He's been doing this for years." He set the document aside and pulled up something else on the tablet. "But it gets worse." Kristen didn't think it could get worse. She was wrong. Enzo turned the tablet toward her, showing her property records, tax documents, legal filings. "The cottage," he said. "The one Paul told you was your dream home. The historic property you thought you were buying together." "We signed the papers last week," Kristen said, her voice hollow. "Paul said it needed work, but that we'd renovate it together, make it ours." "The deed is in your name only," Enzo said, pointing to the document. "Paul's name doesn't appear anywhere. And the property isn't a cottage, it's a shell corporation. According to federal records, it's been flagged by the DEA for suspected narcotics storage." He swiped to another screen. "Paul's been using it to move drugs. The moment you die, or the moment you're arrested, he vanishes. Either way, you take the fall." The rain was coming down harder now, sheets of water obscuring the city lights outside. Kristen stared at the tablet screen, at the evidence of her complete and utter destruction. Paul hadn't just wanted to kill her. He'd wanted to bankrupt her, frame her, destroy every aspect of her life before ending it. And she'd let him. She'd smiled and signed papers and believed every lie. "I'm ruined," she whispered. "Even if I don't die, I'm ruined. The debt, the property, the legal trouble. I'll lose everything." "No." Enzo's voice cut through her spiral. "You won't. How can you say that?" Kristen's vision blurred, tears spilling over despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I signed everything. My name is on all of it. The house, the loans, Her breath caught, her chest tightening. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls of the car felt like they were closing in. She'd been so stupid, so blindly, devastatingly stupid. Enzo moved fast. He took the tablet from her hands and set it aside, then pulled a crystal decanter from a compartment in the door. He poured amber liquid into a glass and pressed it into her hands. "Drink." It wasn't a suggestion. Kristen brought the glass to her lips with shaking hands and took a sip. The liquor burned going down, sharp and grounding. She took another sip, then another, until the tightness in her chest eased slightly. Enzo watched her, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she lowered the glass, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, white linen monogrammed with his initials. He lifted it to her face, wiping away the tears she hadn't realized were still falling. The gesture was surprisingly gentle, his rough thumb brushing against her cheek as he dried her skin. "Breathe," he said softly. "Just breathe." Kristen obeyed, pulling air into her lungs in slow, deliberate breaths. Enzo's hand stayed on her face, his touch warm and solid, an anchor in the storm. "I'll burn the debt," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "I'll erase the property records. I'll make it all disappear." His thumb traced along her jaw. "But first, we burn him." Kristen looked up at him, this man who'd destroyed her illusions and was offering her vengeance in their place. The rain streaked down the windows, blurring the world outside into abstract shapes and shadows. Inside the car, there was only him, only this moment, only the choice she'd already made but hadn't yet spoken aloud. "I did it for my sister," she whispered, the confession torn from somewhere deep inside her. "Everything. The wedding, the rush, all of it. I needed the money for her care. Paul said he'd take care of the bills, that I wouldn't have to worry anymore." Her voice broke. "I thought I was saving her, but I was just digging my own grave." Enzo's expression shifted, something softening in his eyes that Kristen hadn't seen before. He lowered the handkerchief but didn't pull his hand away from her face. "I know," he said quietly. "I know about your sister." Kristen blinked, confusion cutting through her grief. "How could you possibly?" "Because I've been watching you." Enzo's thumb brushed across her cheekbone one last time before he finally pulled away. He leaned forward and tapped the partition. "Change of plans. Take us to Serenity Gardens." The driver didn't respond verbally, but the car changed direction. Kristen's heart lurched. "That's where my sister is. Why are we going there?" "Because you need to see something." Enzo settled back against the leather seat, his body angled toward hers. "And because I want you to understand why I'm doing this, why I've been doing this." The drive took 20 minutes through rain-soaked streets. Kristen sat in silence, her mind racing, trying to piece together what Enzo was telling her. He'd been watching her. He knew about her sister. He'd paid the bills. None of it made sense unless he'd been planning this. unless he'd known about Paul all along. The car pulled up to the care facility, a modern building with soft lighting and manicured grounds. Kristen had been coming here every Sunday for the past 18 months, ever since the accident that had left her younger sister in a persistent vegetative state. She knew every hallway, every nurse, every squeaking wheel on the medication carts. Enzo helped her out of the car, his hand at her elbow as they walked through the rain to the entrance. The lobby was quiet at this hour, just a night receptionist who looked up and immediately straightened when she saw Enzo. "Mr. Arezzo," she said, her voice respectful. "We weren't expecting you tonight. I need to show Miss James something," Enzo said. "The administrative office." The receptionist nodded and buzzed them through without question. Kristen's confusion deepened. "Mr. Arezzo." The staff knew him. The receptionist had called him by name, with the kind of deference reserved for people who held power. Enzo led her down a hallway she'd never been through before, past the patient rooms and therapy areas, to a door marked administration. He pulled out a key and unlocked it, gesturing for her to enter first. The office was dark, but Enzo flipped on the lights, revealing a space that was professional and impersonal, all filing cabinets and computers and framed certificates on the walls. One of those certificates caught Kristen's eye: Serenity Gardens Care Facility, owned and operated by Arezzo Medical Holdings. Her breath caught. "You own this place." "I own 6 facilities like this across the city," Enzo said, moving to one of the filing cabinets. He pulled out a folder, thick with paperwork, and set it on the desk. "This is your sister's file, Emma James, age 24. Admitted 18 months ago after a car accident." He opened the folder, turning pages until he found what he was looking for: a ledger of payments, dates, and amounts in neat columns. "Paul told you he'd pay her medical bills." "Yes." Kristen's voice was barely a whisper. "He said he'd take care of everything, that I shouldn't worry about the money anymore." Enzo's finger traced down the ledger. "Paul hasn't paid a single dollar. Not one. Every bill, every treatment, every medication, it's all been paid by an anonymous benefactor." He looked up at her, his dark eyes intense. "That benefactor was me." The room spun. Kristen gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because I saw you." Enzo moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. 6 months ago, I was here visiting a business associate who was recovering from surgery. I saw you in your sister's room. You were reading to her, some romance novel with a terrible cover, and you were brushing her hair, so gently, even though the nurses had already done it that morning. His voice dropped lower. "The nurse told me your sister couldn't hear you, that she probably never would. But you kept reading anyway. You kept brushing her hair. You kept showing up every Sunday without fail." Tears burned behind Kristen's eyes. She remembered that day. She'd been reading one of those silly romance novels she loved, the kind with happy endings and impossible love stories. She'd felt foolish doing it, knowing Emma couldn't hear, but she'd needed to believe that some part of her sister was still there, still listening. "I couldn't just leave her alone," Kristen whispered. "She's all I have left." "I know." Enzo's hand came up to cup her face again, and this time Kristen didn't pull away. "That's when I started looking into your finances. I saw the bills piling up. I saw you working double shifts, skipping meals, selling everything you owned. And then I saw him." His jaw tightened. "Paul. Circling you like prey." I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it before with the other women, so I started digging. I found the connections to Frank. I found the insurance policies. And I paid Emma's bills because I knew that was the leverage he was using. The thing that would make you desperate enough to marry a stranger. Kristen's hands came up to grip his wrists, needing something solid to hold on to. "You've been protecting me for 6 months, and I didn't even know you existed." That was the point. Enzo's forehead dropped to rest against hers, just like in the elevator, just like in his office. "I couldn't approach you directly. You wouldn't have believed me. You were in love with him, or you thought you were. I had to wait for the right moment. Wait for him to make a mistake." "The ring," Kristen breathed. "You recognized it the moment you walked into my office." His hand slid from her face to her shoulders, pulling her closer. "That's when I knew I had my opening. That's when I could finally tell you the truth." Something broke open inside Kristen's chest. This man, this dangerous, powerful man, had been watching over her sister for 6 months. He'd paid thousands of dollars in medical bills for a woman he'd never met because he'd seen Kristen reading to her, because he'd witnessed an act of devotion and decided it was worth protecting. "I don't understand you," she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't understand any of this. You don't have to understand. Enzo's lips brushed against her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her ache. You just have to trust me. Can you do that? Before Kristen could answer, he pulled away and took her hand. Come on, there's one more thing you need to see before we finish this. He led her back out of the office, through the quiet hallways, and out into the rain. The car was waiting, and once they were inside, Enzo gave the driver new instructions. Not a safe house, not his office. The cemetery, he said. Kristen's blood ran cold. Why are we going to a cemetery? Enzo turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. Grief, old and deep and never fully healed. Because I need you to see one last thing before you become my wife. The cemetery was private, tucked away behind iron gates that opened at Enzo's approach, as if the metal itself recognized him. The rain was relentless now, turning the narrow pathways between headstones into streams of mud and fallen leaves. Kristen pulled her jacket tighter. Though it did nothing against the cold that had seeped into her bones, Enzo stepped out of the car first, then offered his hand to help her out. She took it, her fingers trembling, and together they walked into the darkness. The graves were toward the back, away from the main path, sheltered by ancient oak trees that did little to stop the rain. Enzo led her there without speaking, his hand steady at her elbow, guiding her through the slick grass. When they stopped, Kristen saw 3 headstones arranged in a small semicircle. Simple, elegant, expensive. The kind of monuments that suggested someone had cared enough to give these women a proper burial. Enzo released her arm and stepped back, letting her approach alone. The first headstone read Sarah Mitchell, beloved daughter and wife. The date of death was 2 weeks after her wedding date, which was carved above it. Kristen moved to the second. Rachel Torres, forever in our hearts, same pattern. Wedding date, then death date exactly 14 days later. The third made Kristen's legs buckle. Jessica Langford, gone too soon, 6 months ago, 2 weeks after marrying Paul. Kristen's knees hit the mud before she could stop herself. The cold, wet earth soaked through her dress instantly, but she didn't care. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. These women had stood where she'd stood, had worn engagement rings and planned futures, had trusted Paul the way she'd trusted him, and they were all dead. But it wasn't just grief for them that tore through her. It was grief for herself, for the version of Kristen James who'd believed in love at first sight, who'd thought a handsome man buying her coffee was fate instead of calculation, who'd been stupid enough to think she deserved happiness without questioning its price. That Kristen was dead too. She died the moment Enzo slammed his hand on that desk, the moment he showed her the photographs, the moment she understood that everything she'd believed was a carefully constructed lie designed to kill her. The rain plastered her hair to her face, mixing with tears she didn't remember starting to cry. Her hands dug into the mud, grounding herself in the physical sensation, because everything else felt too enormous to contain. She heard movement behind her, felt, rather than saw Enzo step closer. An umbrella appeared above her head, blocking the worst of the rain, though she was already soaked through. Enzo didn't speak, didn't tell her to get up or that she needed to pull herself together. He just stood there, holding the umbrella, letting her break. Thunder rolled across the sky, low and ominous. Kristen stared at the headstones until the names blurred together. How did you find them? Her voice came out raw, broken. I started looking into Paul after I saw him with you, Enzo said quietly. Found the pattern, found the bodies, found the insurance claims that were never quite investigated thoroughly enough. He paused. Money buys silence, even in death. They were real people. Kristen's fingers curled into fists, mud squelching between them. They had families, dreams. They loved him the way I loved him. You didn't love him. Enzo's voice was gentle but firm. You loved the man he pretended to be. That man never existed, Kristen. He was a ghost, a performance, and you're mourning something that was never real. Then what was I doing? Kristen looked up at him, rain and tears streaming down her face. What have I been doing for the past 3 months? Surviving. Enzo crouched down beside her, the umbrella tilting to keep them both covered. You were trying to save your sister. You were doing what anyone who loves someone would do. That's not weakness. That's not stupidity. That's humanity. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and solid. But you can't mourn a ghost forever. You have to stand up now. I don't know if I can. The admission tore out of her, honest and terrifying. Yes, you can. Enzo shifted, extending his hand toward her, palm up, waiting. Stand up, Kristen. Don't cry for him. Don't give him that power. Make him cry for you instead. Kristen stared at his hand. It was scarred across the knuckles, marked by violence and survival. The hand of a man who'd lived in darkness and learned to thrive there. Everything in her old life had taught her to fear hands like that, but that old life was gone. That version of herself was buried here with Sarah and Rachel and Jessica. She reached up and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, strong and certain, and he pulled her to her feet in one smooth motion. Mud clung to her dress, her knees, her hands. She looked like someone who'd crawled out of a grave. Maybe she had. I want him to pay, Kristen said, her voice steady for the first time since this nightmare began. I want him to feel what they felt. What I'm feeling right now. He will. Enzo's thumb brushed across her knuckles, wiping away mud. But you have to trust me. You have to follow my lead. Can you do that? Kristen looked back at the 3 graves one last time. 3 women who'd never gotten the chance to fight back. 3 women who died believing Paul loved them. She wouldn't be the 4th. Yes, she said. Tell me what to do. Enzo's expression shifted into something darker, something that promised retribution. You have to go back to him tonight, he said. You have to lie to the liar. The wire was small, barely noticeable, taped between her breasts, where Paul would never think to look. Enzo had applied it himself in the back of the limousine, his fingers professional and careful, never straying beyond what was necessary. Then, he had done the hardest thing of all. He had taken the stolen ring, his mother's ring, and slid it back onto Kristen's finger. You have to wear it, he'd told her, his jaw tight. If he sees your hand is bare, he'll know. But Kristen had felt every second of that touch, the contrast between his controlled gentleness and the violence she knew he was capable of. Now, standing outside the apartment she shared with Paul, she pressed her hand against the spot where the wire sat and felt her heartbeat hammering against her palm. I'm here, she whispered, knowing Enzo could hear her, knowing he was in a van somewhere on the street below, listening to every word, every breath. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel less alone. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning, back when she'd been a different person, back when she'd believed in the life these rooms represented. Paul was in the kitchen, and the moment he heard the door, he turned with that smile she'd once thought was meant just for her. Now she saw it for what it was, a weapon, carefully sharpened and precisely aimed. There you are, Paul said, crossing to her with open arms. I was starting to worry. The notary appointment was hours ago. Kristen let him embrace her, let him press a kiss to her temple, and focused on not flinching. His cologne was cheap, she realized. Sweet and cloying, nothing like the subtle leather and smoke scent that clung to Enzo's skin. How had she never noticed before? The notary was slow, she said, keeping her voice light and apologetic. There were complications with the paperwork, but I got everything signed. She pulled back and touched his face, forcing her fingers not to tremble, forcing herself to look into his eyes and see the stranger behind them. It's all taken care of. Paul's expression flickered, just for a second. Suspicion. But then the smile returned, warmer, more reassuring. I knew you could handle it. He took her hand and led her toward the couch. You look exhausted. Let me get you something to drink. I'm fine, Kristen said, but Paul was already moving to the bar cart in the corner. She heard ice clinking into a glass, heard liquid being poured, and her stomach tightened. She thought of Enzo's words in the cemetery. You have to lie to the liar. She could do this. She had to do this. Paul returned with a glass of wine, the expensive kind he always claimed to be saving for special occasions. He handed it to her and settled onto the couch beside her, close enough that their thighs touched. To 3 days from now, he said, raising his own glass. To the rest of our lives. Kristen lifted the glass to her lips but didn't drink. She pretended to take a sip, letting the wine touch her mouth but not swallowing. When she lowered the glass, Paul was watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You seem different, he said, his tone still light but with an edge underneath. Did something happen at the meeting? No, Kristen said quickly. Maybe too quickly. She forced herself to relax, to lean into him the way she always had. I'm just tired. It's been a long day, and there's so much to do before the wedding. Paul's hand came up to stroke her hair, and Kristen had to fight every instinct that screamed at her to pull away. You've been working so hard, he murmured. Taking care of everything. Taking care of your sister. Taking care of us. His fingers trailed down to her neck, resting against her pulse. Could he feel how fast her heart was beating? "You know I appreciate everything you do, right?" "I know," Kristen whispered. The lie tasted like poison. "Good." Paul's hand moved to take the wine glass from her. "Drink up. You need to relax." He guided the glass toward her lips, and this time she had no choice. She took a sip, letting the liquid fill her mouth but holding it there. She tasted something underneath the wine. Something bitter. Something wrong. When Paul turned to set the bottle down, Kristen quickly spat the wine back into her glass and wiped her mouth, praying he hadn't seen. She faked a swallow. Her eyes widened slightly, but she forced herself to smile. "That's better," Paul said, satisfaction in his voice. "Finish it, then we'll get you to bed. You need your rest for the big day." Kristen took another sip, smaller this time, and felt warmth spreading through her limbs that had nothing to do with alcohol. A sedative. He drugged her wine, just like he'd probably drugged the others, making them compliant, making them easy to control. She set the glass down with exaggerated care, letting her hand shake slightly. "I think I need to lie down," she said, her words deliberately slurring just a bit. "I feel strange." "Of course you do." Paul stood and helped her up, his arm around her waist, supportive and possessive. "Come on, let's get you comfortable." He guided her toward the bedroom, and with every step, Kristen let herself lean more heavily against him, playing the part of the drugged, trusting fiancé. In her ear, so faint she almost couldn't hear it, came Enzo's voice through the wire. "Good girl, keep going, I'm right here." Paul laid her on the bed, and she let her eyes flutter closed, let her breathing deepen. She felt him remove her shoes, felt him pull a blanket over her. Then he leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Sleep well, darling," he whispered. "In 3 days, this will all be over, and you won't feel a thing." The bedroom door closed. Kristen waited, counting heartbeats, until she heard Paul on the phone in the living room. His voice was different now. Cold, clinical. "It's done. She's out. Everything's set for the wedding. The insurance policy is active. The property transfer is complete. All I have to do is get through the ceremony, and then she's yours to dispose of." In the van outside, Enzo's hands clenched into fists as he listened. Every word confirmation of what he already knew, but couldn't prevent yet. Not yet. Not until the trap was fully set. 3 more days. 3 more days of watching Kristen play this role. 3 more days of Paul thinking he'd won. 3 days. 3 days of pretending the sedative had worked, of playing the compliant bride-to-be while Paul finalized his plans to kill her. 3 days of Enzo's voice in her ear at night when Paul was asleep, talking her through the plan, keeping her sane when the fear threatened to swallow her whole. And now it was the wedding day, the day Paul thought he'd won. The cathedral was massive, all soaring ceilings and stained glass that caught the morning light and turned it into jewels scattered across the stone floor. Kristen stood in the bride's dressing room, a small space off the main sanctuary, and watched through the cracked door as guests began to arrive. Paul's side of the church was filling up with people she'd never met. Family and friends he'd told her about but never introduced her to. She understood why now. They weren't real. They were actors Paul had hired to play the part of a life that didn't exist. Except today, they weren't Paul's actors. Enzo had found them, paid them more, replaced them with his own people. Men in suits who looked like concerned uncles and childhood friends. Women in tasteful dresses who could pass for distant cousins. All of them loyal to Enzo. All of them waiting for the signal. Kristen's hands trembled as she touched the white silk of her wedding dress. It was beautiful. Exactly what she would have chosen if any of this had been real. Paul had insisted on paying for it, and she'd been touched by the gesture. Now she understood it was just part of the investment, part of making sure the photos looked perfect for the insurance claim. Behind her, the door opened without a knock. Kristen turned, expecting the wedding coordinator, but instead Frank stepped inside. He was smiling, that same easy charm he'd worn in Enzo's office, but something was different in his eyes. Harder, more desperate. "Well, don't you look stunning," Frank said, closing the door behind him. "Paul's a lucky man. Thank you." Kristen kept her voice steady, kept the fear buried deep where he couldn't see it. "Shouldn't you be with the other guests? I wanted to check on you personally." Frank moved closer, and Kristen noticed his hand drift toward his jacket. "Make sure you're feeling all right. Not having any second thoughts." "Why would I have second thoughts?" Kristen asked, even as her pulse hammered in her throat. "I love Paul. Today is everything I've dreamed of." Frank's smile turned cold. "Is it?" Because I heard some interesting things about your little meeting with my former boss. Things that make me think maybe you know more than you should. Kristen opened her mouth to respond, but she didn't get the chance. The heavy curtain behind her shifted, and Enzo stepped out from the shadows where he'd been waiting. He moved like liquid violence, silent and precise, and before Frank could react, Enzo's hand was around his throat, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the wall. The impact was muffled by the thick stone, but Frank's eyes bulged, his hands clawing at Enzo's wrist. "You made 2 mistakes," Enzo said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough menace to freeze blood. "The first was betraying me. The second was coming near her." He leaned in closer, his grip tightening. "Those guards outside? They're mine. This church? Mine. Every person in those pews? Mine." Frank's face was turning purple, his struggles weakening. "You're already dead, Frank. You just didn't know it yet." Enzo released him, and Frank collapsed to the floor, gasping. 2 men appeared in the doorway, silent and efficient. They hauled Frank up by his arms and dragged him out through a side exit. He didn't make a sound. He couldn't. Enzo had crushed something vital in his throat. The door closed, and silence fell over the dressing room like a shroud. Kristen stood frozen, her heart racing, staring at the spot where Frank had been. Enzo turned to her, and the violence drained from his expression, replaced by something softer. "Are you all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Enzo crossed to her, his hands coming up to frame her face, checking her eyes, her breathing, making sure she was truly unharmed. "He won't touch you. No one will." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You're safe with me." "I know," Kristen whispered, and she meant it. She reached up and took his hands, pulling them away from her face so she could hold them between her own. "Thank you." Enzo's expression shifted, something fierce and possessive flashing in his dark eyes. He released one of her hands and reached into his jacket, pulling out something small wrapped in black cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a knife. It was small, elegant, the blade no longer than her palm, but wickedly sharp. "Just in case," he said, kneeling before her. His hand slid under her dress, finding the garter on her thigh, and Kristen's breath caught at the intimacy of the gesture. He secured the knife against the silk and lace, his fingers lingering for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Can you feel it?" "Yes," she breathed. The cold steel pressed against her skin, a reminder of what was at stake, of what she was about to do. Enzo stood, his hands settling on her waist. "It's time. Are you ready?" Kristen turned to look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, the white dress making her look like every bride's magazine dream, but her eyes were different. They weren't the eyes of a victim walking to her execution. They were the eyes of a woman who'd crawled out of her own grave and decided to drag her killer down into it. She looked like a queen preparing for war. "I'm ready," she said. From somewhere beyond the door, the organ began to play. The opening notes of the wedding march filtered through the stone walls. Enzo kissed her forehead, a benediction and a promise, then disappeared through the side exit where Frank had been taken. Kristen picked up her bouquet, white roses mixed with something darker, blood-red peonies that Enzo had insisted on. She walked to the main doors, where an usher she didn't recognize waited to escort her. The doors opened. The church was full. And at the altar, dressed in a perfect suit with a perfect smile, Paul was waiting. The walk down the aisle was the longest of Kristen's life. Each step felt like walking through water, heavy and surreal, while the organ music swelled around her. She kept her eyes locked on Paul, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored suit, his smile wide and confident. But there was something wrong with him. His forehead glistened with sweat despite the cool air in the cathedral. His eyes kept darting to his watch, then back to her, then to the guests, as if he was calculating something, waiting for something. He was counting down the hours until he could kill her. Kristen's fingers tightened on her bouquet, the thorns of the roses hidden beneath the blooms biting into her palm through the ribbon. The pain kept her focused, kept her moving forward. Halfway down the aisle, she heard it. The heavy thud of the cathedral doors closing, then the unmistakable sound of locks sliding into place. The sound echoed through the stone sanctuary like a death knell. Paul's head snapped toward the doors, confusion flickering across his face. And then, as if choreographed, every guest on his side of the church stood up in perfect unison. Not like wedding guests rising for the bride, like soldiers awaiting orders. Paul's confusion turned to alarm. He took a step back from the altar, his hand moving to his jacket pocket, but he froze when he saw Kristen's expression. She wasn't smiling anymore, wasn't playing the blushing bride. She reached the altar, and when Paul extended his hand toward her, trembling now, she didn't take it. Instead, she dropped her bouquet. The flowers hit the marble floor with a soft thud, petals scattering like drops of blood, and then Kristen pulled her arm back and slapped him across the face with every ounce of strength she had. The sound cracked through the cathedral like a gunshot. Paul staggered, his hand flying to his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. The guests didn't gasp. They didn't move. They just watched, waiting. Kristen stepped closer, her voice cold and clear, carrying to every corner of the church. "Do you have a husband, Paul?" She let the words hang in the air, let him hear the echo of what Frank had asked her in Enzo's office. "Because I do." Paul's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "Kristen, what's going on?" "I think she's talking about me." The voice came from above, deep and resonant, and Kristen's heart kicked against her ribs even though she'd been expecting it. Paul's head snapped up toward the choir loft, and Kristen turned to watch Enzo emerge from the shadows. He moved with lethal grace, descending the stairs slowly, deliberately, his dark suit fitting him like a second skin. Every eye in the cathedral tracked his movement. When he reached the main aisle, the guests parted like water, creating a path directly to the altar. Enzo walked through them, his presence filling the space until it felt like he was the only thing that existed. He stopped beside Kristen, and his arm came around her waist, pulling her against his side with possessive certainty. "You," Paul breathed, recognition and terror warring on his face. "You're Enzo Arezzo. What are you doing here? Claiming what's mine?" Enzo's hand tightened on Kristen's waist. "You see, Paul, you made a critical mistake. You stole from me. That ring you gave her? It belonged to my mother. And when you steal from me, I take everything from you." Paul's eyes went wild. He looked at Kristen, then at Enzo, then at the guests who were no longer pretending to be anything other than what they were. Armed men, Enzo's soldiers. "This is insane. Kristen, baby, whatever he told you, it's a lie. I love you. We're getting married." "No," Kristen said, her voice steady. "We're not. Because 3 days ago, when you thought I was unconscious from the sedative you put in my wine, I heard you on the phone. I heard you tell your partner that I'd be dead within 2 weeks of the wedding. Just like Sarah. Just like Rachel. Just like Jessica." Paul's face went from white to gray. "You don't understand. They were nobody. But you're different. I actually..." "Save it." Enzo cut him off, his tone bored. "We've heard enough." He raised his hand, and the vestry doors at the side of the church opened. Men in suits walked out. But these weren't Enzo's soldiers. These were men with badges, police detectives, and behind them, men in expensive but worn suits, creditors, the kind of men who collected debts that couldn't be written off. "You know what's funny about prenuptial agreements, Paul?" Enzo continued conversationally. "You should check your pockets more carefully. Kristen didn't just sleep for the last 3 days. She switched the papers in your jacket while you were in the shower." Paul's hand went to his jacket pocket, pulling out the folded document he'd been carrying. He opened it with shaking hands, and Kristen watched the blood drain from his face as he read. "This isn't the prenup." "No," Kristen said. "It's a confession. Every woman you killed. Every insurance policy you collected. Every debt you ran up in their names. You signed it all, Paul. You signed your own death warrant." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "How does it feel to be the victim for once?" Paul tried to run. He actually tried to push past Enzo and make for the side exit, but he barely made it 2 steps before Enzo's men were on him. They grabbed his arms, forcing him to his knees on the altar steps. Paul looked up at Kristen, and for the first time, she saw real fear in his eyes, real understanding that he had lost. "Please," he begged. "Kristen, please. I'll give back the money. I'll disappear. Just let me go." "Let you go?" Kristen crouched down, meeting his eyes at his level. "Like you let Sarah go? Like you let Rachel and Jessica go?" She stood back up, and Enzo's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Drag him out," Enzo ordered. "The creditors get first payment, then the police can have what's left." The men hauled Paul to his feet and dragged him toward the vestry. His screams echoed off the stone walls, pleas for mercy that no one would grant. The doors closed behind him, and the screaming cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute. The guests, Enzo's men, began filing out through the side exits, efficient and silent, until only Enzo and Kristen remained in the vast cathedral. She stood at the altar in her white dress, and he stood beside her in his dark suit, and between them was the promise of something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "The wedding is paid for," Enzo said quietly, turning to face her fully. His hands came up to cup her face, tilting it up toward his. "The groom is available." Kristen's breath caught. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm telling you that you're mine." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "You've been mine since the moment you walked into my office, since the moment I saw you reading to your sister, since the moment I decided you were worth saving." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "But the choice is still yours, Kristen. Walk away now, and I'll let you go. Stay, and you're bound to me. To this life, to everything that comes with it." Kristen's hands slid up his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "I'm not walking away." She rose up on her toes, closing the distance between them. "I choose you." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed more than a promise. It sealed a pact, a future built on revenge and protection, and something that neither of them could name yet, but both of them felt burning between them. Enzo's arms wrapped around her, pulling her flesh against him, and Kristen let herself melt into it. Let herself fall. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Enzo's eyes were dark with something that made her pulse race. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Arezzo." Did Kristen make the right choice choosing the monster over the man? If you want to hear more stories where the villain becomes the hero, hit that subscribe button. Join our family for more dark, twisted romances that prove love is the most dangerous weapon of all. Leave a comment saying, "I do," if you would have chosen Enzo.